Michelle, thank you for being with us today for this interview. Perhaps we can start off by talking a little bit about DKSH Own Brands. Now, we know that Own Brands has been a pillar for DKSH for more than 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about how Own Brands expands the company's identity from a distributor to a therapeutic area expert that directly influences clinical outcomes in Southeast Asia?
DKSH has been around for 170 years as a whole company, and as you rightfully pointed out, DKSH Own Brands has only been in practice about 20 over years ago. So the entire basis of the company initially is indeed distribution, which is a very operational way of helping markets expand their presence in this part of the world. But, commercialization is beyond just distribution of products, because distribution, then you leave very little control over how you strategize, how you market the products and how you even build the right kind of resourcing behind it to make sure that you have the correct front-facing personnel there. So then the company expanded into commercial outsourcing, which is primarily just to support the commercialization needs of organization. But these two are still very much service-based models. So Own Brands came about because we saw that as markets are evolving, companies have to make decisions that will require them to deprioritize or relook into some of the products that they are owning. And they may not necessarily only need a distribution or a commercial model, because sometimes they still want this product to thrive on its own, but they need someone to basically take care of it, long term and own it. So I think that's the whole genesis of how DKSH Own Brands started with, when we see that to be more holistic in our service offering, it is beyond just being a service provider, but it's also about showing what we can do to nurture and continue to harness the potential in the brand. So with Own Brands coming in, as we look into the full ownership of the brand, then herein comes the whole responsibility around owning the clinical outcomes, owning that conversation with the healthcare professionals out there, and to make sure that we build a team that is adequately equipped to do that. So we function almost entirely like a pharma division within DKSH. So what we need to do with the brand from end-to-end commercialization, before the product is launched, if there's registration needs required, along the way when we need to tap into market access needs, when we need to engage our HCPs, I think this is what our Own Brands do, very much so that we take full accountability behind the brand's success rather than to just service the brand. So that's really the genesis of how we continue to be very, I would say, focused on the clinical outcomes of the patients, because we see ourselves plugging a need into this underserved patient community. And by underserved, Julian, is really more of when we see that companies typically like to streamline their focus into the more innovative areas, or the areas where there's a bigger concentration of research effort. Some patients get left behind. And these patients who get left behind, they may be the patients who are part of a so-called established portfolio, or they are part of a disease entity which maybe no longer warrants that much share of voice from the parent company. But DKSH Own Brands will come in, and we think that we continue to plug that conversation and share of voice gap here, because these patients need to be served. And for them to be served, then we need to ensure that we keep connected with the healthcare community and make sure that the brand priorities transpire into patient and clinical outcomes.
So basically to ensure that nobody gets left behind.
Absolutely.
That's very good. So just touching on a little bit about Own Brands European foundation. So how does having a European foundation influence your approach to innovation and quality standards when developing products for Singapore and the wider Asian region?
Right. So our European foundation is primarily Switzerland, and we pride ourselves a lot in terms of Swiss standards of production. So a lot of our Own Brands product, the foundation of where we branch out as Own Brands was because of the Swiss entity, and then we use that as a platform to pipeline our acquisitions and our subsequent licensing molecules. But back to the Swiss entity where we are functioning from, we fully are accountable for the end-to-end manufacturing of these products, apply very high level of Swiss quality requirements to these products. And then we also make sure that we are also continually investing into innovation. What I mean by innovation is that these products even though some of them are not new products. So I know that's a paradox on its own. New product innovation, how does this, old products innovation, how does this go together? Because the kind of products we own in the Swiss entity are not products that are easily replicable. Because these, for example, one of our products is a combination of a low-dose hormone and a live lactobacilli. We are the only company that has a live lactobacilli component in one vaginal tablet. So how do we do that? Because we apply Swiss standards to the manufacturing of the live lactobacilli, we are able to harvest it such that it can still retain its integrity even in room temperature, and then from there have a higher level of restoration of the microbiome without having to go to a very rigorous cold chain standard. So this is the kind of innovation that we infuse into the products that we have, applying Swiss standards of manufacturing and making sure that even though these products have already many years on the shelf, there's something that we can still pride ourselves behind the standards of production, and we continue to serve this to the patient community.
So basically also it is about, you take something that's existing, you improve its functionality, improve its shelf life, ease of use, and thereby, from this sort of innovation, bring new life to products and new applications for patients. Would that be a fair statement?
Somewhat, but it's really more of the way we develop our product is beyond the norm. Yeah, so some of these, so we don't own that many products, but as long as we own these products, because back to your point, how do we use our European entity, which is primarily Swiss, to apply this into what we offer for patients, is because we don't just go for the Me Too kind of product. So let's say if we talk, going back to the same product, if it's a low-dose hormone, there are many low-dose hormone alternatives out there. So what makes this different is the combination of this with a microbiome element, which is normally the bacteria. So a lot of these bacteria out in the market, they are not live. So we do a twist to it. We apply Swiss standards to make sure that we can cultivate something that's live, combine it together. Of course, we run the clinical studies and the research to know that this product and this combo would be the most relevant for the condition that it is indicated for. But at the same time, it's also something that only by applying Swiss standards that we can produce. So that's really something that we pride ourselves in, that even for these legacy products, coming back to the little paradoxical statement earlier, they are being helped by the innovation that we put into them. And we continue to uphold the high standards of production to deliver this innovation for a legacy product to patients.
How is DKSH curating its portfolio to ensure that women in this region they have access to the same caliber of diagnostic and therapeutic solutions available in more developed Western countries?
So this goes back also in terms of where the whole company stands in terms of market expansion and now into patient solutions, right? So when we look at bridging the gap in women's health, we endeavor to curate where the big brothers or where people are generally not curating, because there's no point trying to go there and grab a piece of the pie where, again, there's a high level of investment behind, there's a high share of voice behind, there's high enthusiasm. This group of patients there are well served because of the intention of where that next wave of products or innovations are coming in. So our curation, firstly, primarily is to come towards the underserved women's health community. So some of the areas that we play in is postmenopausal health. In what regards? For atrophy, which is dryness in the area. And for a postmenopausal woman, this affects them their whole lifetime. But many women do not know that there's a solution for this. And this is also not a topic whereby there's new exciting innovation coming through, or there's a lot of R&D work happening, or the community is really talking about that. In fact, if we talk about this more from a woman's health and the burden it inflicts on the woman, it creates a lot of awareness in them, that, or consciousness, or rather, that this is just part of who they've become. And they have to accept this and live with it and accept the quality of life that comes with that. So we plug ourselves into this space as an underserved women community. Another space that we plug ourselves into is HPV. So the HPV wave is very big on vaccination, and it's so well communicated already that we all know that going for HPV vaccination is really almost like one of the vaccinations that people should go for. So I think the message has been very well sent. So why do we plug the gap here? So we plug in the space of HPV infections that are present, causing lesions, but there's nothing to do at this point in time. So the historical approach is when you go for any kind of pap smear or scan and you end up having a HPV infection, the doctor will tell you, wait and see. Because there's really nothing that can be done. It's just lesion. The lesion suggests that there's an infection going on there. You wait and see, but what's the consequence of wait and see? Along their life course, there's a 30% chance they regress into cancer. So for a woman that has this, I think there's a lot of mental anxiety. Even for within the family, I think there's some degree of finger pointing that may happen there, and that adds on more to the anxiety. So what we do to plug the gap here in our curation is to bring in product that can clear the lesions. So this product that we bring in, this is a true innovation because it's the first in its space that can completely clear the lesions, and it will re-promote the re-epithelialization of the vaginal area. So this actually helps to negate that whole wait and see anxiety and give women control over what they want to do when they get the info that they are diagnosed with HPV infections early stage. Because for them to have to think about, I have early stage and maybe when it becomes late stage, I may even have to go for some kind of more dramatic intervention, having an early option to clear could potentially mean a lot. So that's really the genesis of how we do our curation, whereby we think about how do we value add to this space and serve the underserved community.
So, in terms of public education as well as clinical education, how important do you think this approach is? So, educating the public that they for instance, this HPV that they don't have to wait for the lesions to form. That there is a solution out there and successfully intervene in the interim. So this approach, educating the public, educating the healthcare providers, and also maybe partnering with healthcare providers to provide such education to the patients and the public at large. How important do you think this is, especially for a pharmaceutical company such as yourself?
The public education is definitely very important because it will create that understanding that there is a solution that's out there for them to consider. At the same time, it also enables the HCP to be able to bridge that care. Because sometimes what we find is if we are overtly focused just on our interactions with HCPs, then it ends up that they know the solution, but they have to jump through a few hoops to explain this to their patients. Hey, I've got this thing that it does this. And then nowadays patients are very savvy. So they like to, okay, if you tell me, maybe let me think about this, let me go and Google and find out more about this and read up more about this. And if we don't ensure that they're equally furbished with information in this space, then they are not able to make that decision along with their HCPs. So, public education is, especially when we talk about, subtherapeutic areas which requires more thinking. Because it's not something that you assume people already know is there. So this is often something that, we need to support the doctor to have that narrative so that it really leads to a more collaborative joint decision making. And both parties are also aligned with the outcome in that sense. So they know, okay, by choosing this option, what I'm going for, what this does for me. How come I never heard of this before? Oh, okay, so this is what I can potentially do. So it also really helps the doctor to consider the patients that are fit for this, because sometimes, there will be some patient outcomes that we cannot achieve, and so it's important that as we consider these options along with the public education together, they make a weighted decision on whether to pursue this or not.
I totally agree with that thing. If as an individual, if I didn't know that such a solution exists, I wouldn't know how to even search for it.
Absolutely.
Right? So I'll just be looking for vaccines or treatments or medications that treat the lesions. Again, in the HPV example, rather than something that intervenes in the interim. So, but yes, I think agree totally that public education is very important. So on this note, and looking at the rest of 2026, are there any products or potential new launches from brands that doctors or patients should be watching out for?
The HPV one is one of the key ones that we are launching in more markets around the region. So we had our first launch in Thailand last year, and we had resounding success in Thailand. Success, I mean, in terms of the patients who are aware and they come to seek treatment, right? So we tripled our expectations in Thailand because I think for us, it was a deep learning that when we send this message out, that the number of patients out there waiting to receive something is actually beyond our initial expectations. Yeah, so it really goes to show that actually this sense of urgency just needed a catalyst. It is not even something that required a lot of deep education or, proof or anything, because these people are already there waiting for potentially something to serve them in that space of wait and see. So this particular product for HPV lesions clearance, which comes in the form of an innovative spray, it will be available in a lot more countries this year. Yeah, and the countries that we're having beyond Thailand will be Hong Kong, we're also having this in Philippines, and we just got, in fact, an expedited approval in Singapore. So we were expecting, the usual timelines, and we were quite intrigued that we got approval within 3 months. It's registered as a medical device, and HSE was very quick to approve this. I think it goes to show the quality of clinical evidence that we presented and how well they see this may plug a deep unmet need in this space there. So we're really excited by the responses that we are getting. And we're also going to launch in Indonesia. So I guess with more markets coming on board this year, on top with our legacy in women's health in the postmenopausal space, the antibiotic resistance space that we are playing in, looking at our upcoming pipelines also in the fertility space for men's health. So that's complementary to the women's health side because it affects the pregnancy. So I think this is where we are also looking to in fact it's really in the plan to have a more, I would say, dedicated engagement with a group of experts from around the region and globally, because a lot of our women's health groups come from Europe. So from there, we hope to engage them more on a regular basis on our manuscript, on our case discussion. So I think there's a deeper intention to work with them now that we have really not just our legacy innovative offerings, but true innovation coming into this space. I think we would like to take a step back and see how does this look like in the whole context of the gap in women's health, and how we can use our interactions with them to really drive more awareness around bridging the women's healthcare equity. Yeah, and then to see how this can even be something more meaningful for consideration beyond the healthcare space, even into the policy shaping arena. So that's really like a big part of the work that we are moving into in 2026.